The people who think they won are often the least prepared for what comes next. The ballroom shimmered beneath layers of crystal chandeliers, each one scattering warm gold light across polished marble floors that seemed to stretch forever. Soft piano music drifted through the air while servers in black suits moved silently between clusters of guests holding champagne glasses. It was the kind of evening where success was worn like jewelry and every smile seemed carefully practiced. Ryan Whitmore stepped through the entrance with the confidence of a man who believed life had finally rewarded him. Standing beside him was Madison Reed, his fiancée. Her diamond engagement ring caught the light every time she moved her hand, and Ryan noticed the glances they attracted. He enjoyed them. Madison looked elegant in a designer gown, and together they appeared exactly as Ryan had always imagined successful people should appear. As they crossed the ballroom, familiar faces greeted them. Handshakes were exchanged. Compliments were offered. Laughter followed them from one conversation to the next. Ryan felt comfortable here. Important, even. He had spent years building this version of himself, carefully leaving behind everything that reminded him of a life he no longer wanted to remember. Then he saw her. At first, it was only a glimpse. A woman standing alone near one of the tall windows overlooking the city skyline. The lights from downtown reflected against the glass behind her, creating a soft glow around her silhouette. Ryan froze for half a second before recognizing the face he had not seen in years. Clare Bennett. The name landed quietly inside his chest. Not painfully. Not nostalgically. Just unexpectedly. Madison followed his gaze. "Someone you know?" she asked. Ryan looked again. Clare wore a dark blue evening dress that was elegant without trying too hard. No flashy jewelry. No dramatic entrance. No desperate attempt to attract attention. She simply stood there, calm and composed, holding a glass of sparkling water while watching the city beyond the window. "My ex-wife," Ryan said casually. Madison raised an eyebrow. "That's her?" Ryan nodded. Something about the question pleased him. He was not sure why. Maybe because Clare looked exactly as he remembered her. Quiet. Reserved. Invisible in a room full of people trying to be noticed. Years ago, he had convinced himself that leaving her was the right decision. Their marriage had felt ordinary. Predictable. Too small for the future he wanted. He remembered telling himself that some people were simply meant for bigger lives. Looking at Clare now, he felt strangely reassured. She was alone. He was not. He had arrived with a fiancée. She stood by herself. The comparison settled comfortably in his mind. Across the ballroom, Clare turned slightly and their eyes met for the first time that evening. Ryan expected surprise. Maybe discomfort. Instead, she offered a small polite smile. Nothing more. Then she returned her attention to the skyline outside. The reaction bothered him more than he cared to admit. It was as though his presence changed nothing. As though years had passed and she no longer carried any of the weight he assumed she would. Madison slipped her arm through his. "Do you want to say hello?" she asked. Ryan kept watching Clare from across the room. The piano music continued. Conversations flowed around them. Somewhere beyond the ballroom windows, the city glittered beneath the night sky. A faint smile appeared on Ryan's face. "Actually," he said, straightening his jacket, "I think I do." And with that, he started walking toward the woman he believed he had left behind, completely unaware that this evening was about to change everything he thought he knew. Ryan crossed the ballroom with the easy confidence of someone who believed the evening belonged to him. The polished marble reflected the glow of the chandeliers overhead, and every step seemed to carry him deeper into a moment he had already imagined in his mind. Madison stayed close beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as they approached the woman standing near the window. Clare noticed them coming long before they arrived. She turned from the city lights and faced them with the same calm expression she had worn all evening. There was no tension in her posture. No visible discomfort. If seeing Ryan again after all these years affected her, she gave no sign of it. "Claire," Ryan said with a smile. "I did not expect to see you here." Claire returned a polite smile. "Good evening, Ryan." The simplicity of her response caught him slightly off guard. He had expected at least a trace of surprise. Instead, her voice sounded steady, almost warm, as though they were distant acquaintances who happened to share a history. Ryan quickly recovered. "You remember Madison?" Madison extended her hand. "It is nice to finally meet you." Claire shook it gently. "You too." For a moment, silence settled between them. Around them, conversations continued beneath the soft music. Glasses clinked. Laughter drifted across the room. Yet Ryan felt strangely aware of every second passing. He was the one who broke the silence. "Madison and I got engaged 6 months ago," he said. "We are planning a wedding next spring." Madison smiled brightly. "We are thinking about a ceremony in Napa Valley. Something intimate." Claire nodded. "That sounds lovely." Ryan waited for something more. A reaction. A question. Perhaps disappointment hidden behind polite words. Instead, Claire simply sipped her sparkling water. Madison exchanged a brief glance with Ryan before speaking again. "Ryan tells me you two were married for several years." "We were," Claire replied. "A long time ago." Her answer was not cold. It was not emotional. It simply sounded finished. As though that chapter belonged entirely to the past. Ryan felt an unexpected irritation. He could not explain why. Everything about this conversation should have reassured him. He had moved on. He was successful. He was engaged to a beautiful woman. Yet Claire's composure felt strangely unsettling. It denied him the satisfaction he never realized he had expected. Madison continued speaking, unaware of the shift in Ryan's mood. She talked about wedding venues, travel plans, and the new house she and Ryan had recently purchased outside the city. Claire listened politely and offered occasional congratulations. Nothing more. Several nearby guests began noticing the conversation. Curious glances drifted toward them. Some recognized Ryan. Others recognized Claire. The quiet tension of former spouses meeting again carried a natural fascination. Ryan became aware of the small audience forming around them. The attention encouraged him. "Life has worked out well for us," he said casually. "I feel fortunate." Claire met his eyes. "That is good to hear." Again, nothing. No jealousy. No bitterness. No regret. Just a simple response delivered with complete sincerity. Ryan looked at her more carefully now. For the first time, he noticed something different. Claire did not look like someone trying to survive. She looked like someone entirely at peace. The realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Then, from somewhere near the ballroom entrance, a subtle change moved through the crowd. Conversation softened. Heads turned. Several executives standing nearby suddenly straightened their posture. Claire glanced toward the entrance for only a second before returning her gaze to her glass. A faint smile touched the corner of her lips. Ryan followed the direction of everyone's attention, unaware that the next person to enter the ballroom was about to change the entire evening. The subtle shift that moved through the ballroom was impossible to ignore. Conversations softened into murmurs. Executives who moments earlier had been laughing comfortably now turned their attention toward the entrance. Ryan followed their gaze, expecting to see a celebrity, a politician, or perhaps one of the event sponsors. Instead, all he saw at first was a tall figure stepping through the open doors beneath the glow of the chandeliers. The man wore a perfectly tailored black suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. There was nothing flashy about him. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to draw attention. Yet attention seemed to follow him naturally. Several business leaders immediately moved toward him. Hands were extended. Smiles appeared. One after another, influential guests greeted him with unmistakable respect. Ryan frowned slightly. He knew many of the people attending tonight. Some were company founders. Some managed investment firms worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet they all seemed eager to speak. With this man. Do you know who that is? Madison asked softly. Ryan shook his head. No. Across from them, Claire remained perfectly calm. She did not stare. She did not wave. She simply stood beside the window as though nothing unusual was happening. That small detail caught Ryan's attention. Most people in the room were curious. Claire looked completely unsurprised. Before he could think further about it, a memory surfaced unexpectedly. Years ago, Claire had always been the calm one. During difficult moments, she rarely raised her voice. She rarely complained. Sometimes that steadiness frustrated him. Back then, Ryan had been impatient. Ambitious. Hungry for a future that felt bigger than the life they shared. He remembered their small apartment outside Chicago. 700 square feet. One bedroom. A kitchen barely large enough for 2 people. Claire used to wake before sunrise every morning. She would prepare coffee while the city was still dark outside their windows. Ryan often left early, chasing opportunities and networking events. Claire stayed behind, balancing work, bills, and responsibilities that rarely received recognition. At the time, he barely noticed. Looking back now, the memories returned with surprising clarity. The smell of coffee. The stack of unpaid invoices sitting on the kitchen counter. Claire studying spreadsheets late at night while believing he had already fallen asleep. She carried more weight than he ever acknowledged. But Ryan quickly pushed the memories aside. The past no longer mattered, he told himself. Their marriage had ended years ago. Everyone had moved on. Yet as he watched Claire standing alone beneath the city lights, something felt different from what he had expected. She did not look like someone left behind by life. She looked like someone who had found her place within it. Near the entrance, the mysterious man continued greeting guests. Then, unexpectedly, he stopped. His attention shifted across the ballroom. For a brief moment, his eyes settled in Claire's direction. Ryan noticed it immediately. So did Madison. The man's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Not dramatically. Just enough to suggest recognition. Claire lowered her gaze for a second before a small smile appeared. It was the first genuine smile Ryan had seen from her all evening. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. He could not explain why. The man exchanged a few final words with a group of executives before beginning to move through the crowd. He was not heading toward the stage. He was not approaching the event organizers. Step by step, he walked directly across the ballroom. Directly toward Claire. And for the first time that night, Ryan realized he was no longer the most important person in her world. The distance between them disappeared quickly, yet the atmosphere around the ballroom seemed to change with every step the man took. Conversations faded into the background. Guests subtly shifted aside, creating a clear path without anyone asking them to. Ryan had spent years attending corporate events, and he recognized influence when he saw it. What unsettled him was how naturally this influence appeared. Nobody seemed eager to impress the man. Instead, they seemed genuinely honored by his attention. The stranger finally reached Claire. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then a warm smile appeared on his face, transforming the serious expression he had carried across the room. Claire's eyes brightened in a way Ryan had not seen all evening. It was not the polite smile she had offered him. It was something real. Something effortless. The man leaned slightly closer and said something Ryan could not hear. Claire laughed softly. The sound carried only a few feet, yet somehow it felt louder than all the conversations surrounding them. Madison noticed it too. "They seem close," she said quietly. Ryan forced a small shrug. "Maybe they work together." But even as he spoke, he did not believe it. There was a familiarity between them that could not be explained by business alone. The man accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and handed it directly to Claire before taking one for himself. It was a small gesture. Simple. Thoughtful. The kind of thing people did when they knew each other's habits without needing to ask. Ryan felt a strange discomfort settle deeper inside him. Across the ballroom, several executives approached the pair. Ryan immediately recognized one of them as the chief executive officer of a national investment firm. Another managed a company that regularly appeared in financial magazines. Both greeted the mysterious man first. Only afterward did they acknowledge everyone else. The pattern repeated itself again and again. People came to him. Not the other way around. Madison watched carefully. "Who is he?" she whispered. "I have no idea," Ryan answered. Yet now he wanted to know. More than he cared to admit. Nearby, one guest approached Claire and greeted her with obvious respect. Another asked her opinion on a charity initiative. A third thanked her for supporting a recent community project. Ryan listened from a distance, confused. Years ago, Claire rarely enjoyed being the center of attention. She preferred quiet conversations and meaningful work over public recognition. Yet tonight she moved through these interactions with remarkable ease. She was confident without being arrogant. Comfortable without seeking attention. It was as though she belonged in this world. As though she had always belonged. Ryan found himself remembering another night years earlier. He had come home frustrated after a difficult meeting. He had spent hours complaining about opportunities he felt were being denied to him. Claire had listened patiently before offering a simple piece of advice. "Focus on becoming valuable," she had said. "Recognition eventually follows value." At the time, he dismissed the comment. It sounded too idealistic. Too simple. Looking at her now, he wondered if she had quietly followed her own advice all along. The mysterious man glanced at Claire again, and she responded with another smile. Not once did she look toward Ryan. Not once did she seem interested in whether he was watching. That realization bothered him more than he expected. Then a member of the event staff hurried toward the stage near the center of the ballroom. The microphone was adjusted. The music softened. Guests gradually turned their attention forward. Whatever announcement was about to happen clearly mattered. The man standing beside Claire looked toward the stage with calm familiarity, as though he already knew what was coming. And for the first time that evening, Ryan began to suspect that the most important person in the room was not who he had originally believed. As guests gradually gathered closer to the stage, Claire remained where she was, standing beside the tall windows that overlooked the glittering city below. The lights beyond the glass stretched for miles, thousands of tiny points shining against the darkness. For a moment, the distant skyline reminded her of another night years earlier, when her future had looked very different. There had been no grand ballroom then. No crystal chandeliers. No executives waiting for announcements. Just a small apartment and a kitchen table covered with bills. After the divorce, the silence inside that apartment had felt overwhelming. Ryan had moved on quickly. Friends stopped calling as often. Invitations became rare. Some people quietly chose sides. Others simply disappeared. Claire remembered sitting alone at that kitchen table long after midnight, staring at numbers that never seemed to work. Rent. Utilities. Insurance. Every dollar had a purpose before it even arrived. She remembered mornings that began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. She worked wherever opportunity appeared. Consulting projects. Administrative contracts. Volunteer leadership positions that paid nothing but created connections. There were months when success felt impossibly far away. Yet she never allowed herself to become bitter. Instead, she focused on something simpler. Becoming stronger than she had been the day before. One step at a time. One decision at a time. One difficult morning after another. She learned new skills. Took classes during weekends. Read business books borrowed from public libraries. Attended community events where nobody knew her history. Little by little, the life she thought had ended began quietly rebuilding itself. No dramatic breakthrough arrived. No miracle changed everything overnight. Progress came in inches. Then feet. Then miles. Eventually people stopped seeing her as someone's former wife. They started seeing her as Clare Bennett. A woman with ideas. Leadership. Vision. The transformation had happened so gradually that she barely noticed it herself. Back in the ballroom, Ryan stood several yards away watching her. The more he looked, the more confused he became. Years ago, he believed Clare lacked ambition. Looking back now, he wondered whether he had simply misunderstood the kind of ambition she possessed. His version had always been loud. Visible. Measured by titles and achievements. Clare's version seemed quieter. More patient. Yet somehow it had carried her further than he expected. Nearby, Madison continued speaking about the upcoming wedding, but Ryan found himself distracted. His attention repeatedly drifted toward Clare and the man standing beside her. The stranger listened attentively whenever she spoke. He never interrupted. Never tried to dominate the conversation. More surprisingly, some of the most powerful people in the room appeared willing to wait for his attention. It was a level of influence Ryan had rarely witnessed firsthand. Then the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. The stage brightened. A spotlight illuminated the podium near the center of the room. The event host stepped forward and welcomed everyone to the evening's celebration. Applause filled the room. Guests turned toward the stage. Clare finally stepped away from the window. The mysterious man moved beside her naturally, as though they had done this countless times before. Together they walked toward the front section reserved for honored guests. Ryan noticed several executives immediately standing to greet them. His stomach tightened. Reserved seating near the stage was not offered casually at events like this. It was earned. The host smiled broadly as he adjusted the microphone and looked out across the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before we continue tonight's program, there is someone very special we would like to recognize." The room grew completely silent. And for reasons he could not explain, Ryan suddenly had the feeling that the next few minutes were about to answer every question he had been asking himself all evening. The host paused for a moment, allowing the anticipation to settle across the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes focused on the stage. Crystal chandeliers reflected softly against polished surfaces while the final notes of the background music faded into silence. Ryan stood motionless beside Madison, his attention fixed on the podium. The feeling in his chest had become impossible to ignore. Something important was unfolding, and somehow Clare was connected to it. "Tonight," the host began, "we celebrate leadership, innovation, and the people whose vision continues to shape communities across the country." Applause echoed briefly through the room. The host smiled before continuing. "We are especially honored to welcome one of the most respected philanthropists and business leaders in America." Several guests immediately exchanged knowing looks. Others straightened in their seats. Ryan noticed that some of the most influential executives in attendance were already smiling. Clearly, they knew exactly who was about to be mentioned. The host gestured toward the front section of the ballroom. "Please join me in recognizing a man whose companies employ tens of thousands of people and whose charitable foundation has transformed countless lives." The applause grew louder. Ryan glanced toward the mysterious man beside Clare. He remained calm. No visible excitement. No performance. Just quiet confidence. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Then something happened that Ryan could not explain. Before the host even spoke another word, several guests rose to their feet. More followed. Then dozens more. Within seconds, a standing ovation spread across the room. Madison looked surprised. "Who is this guy?" she whispered. Ryan had no answer. The host finally spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alexander Kingsley." The name struck the room like a wave. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Ryan felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Everyone in business knew that name. Alexander Kingsley was not simply successful. He was one of the most powerful entrepreneurs in the country. Financial magazines featured him regularly. News networks sought his opinions during economic crises. Entire industries paid attention when he made decisions. Ryan had read articles about him for years. Yet somehow, standing only yards away, he had failed to recognize him. Madison's eyes widened. "Alexander Kingsley," she breathed. Ryan nodded slowly, unable to look away. On stage, the host continued listing accomplishments. Billion-dollar acquisitions. National expansion projects. Humanitarian initiatives. Educational programs. The achievements seemed endless. Yet Ryan barely heard the words. His attention remained fixed on one detail. Clare. She was standing beside Alexander Kingsley as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She was not nervous. Not intimidated. Not impressed by his status. She simply looked comfortable in his presence. Familiar. The realization created 100 questions at once. How did they know each other? Why had Clare never mentioned him? How long had this connection existed? As applause continued filling the ballroom, Alexander finally stood and acknowledged the crowd with a gracious nod. Then, instead of immediately heading toward the stage, he turned toward Clare. Without saying a word, he offered her his hand. She accepted it effortlessly. The gesture lasted only a second, yet it carried a quiet intimacy that did not go unnoticed. Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. Across the room, several guests smiled knowingly at the sight. Others seemed entirely unsurprised. It was as though everyone understood something he had yet to discover. Alexander then looked at Clare with unmistakable warmth before leading her toward the stage. Side by side, they moved through the crowd while hundreds of guests watched. And as Ryan stood frozen beside Madison, a single thought echoed through his mind. If Clare was important enough to stand beside Alexander Kingsley tonight, then he had completely misunderstood the woman he thought he knew. The applause continued as Alexander Kingsley reached the stage, but Ryan barely heard it anymore. The noise seemed distant, swallowed by the realization that had just crashed into his carefully constructed view of the evening. Madison remained silent beside him. For the first time since they arrived. Neither of them seemed interested in speaking. Every eye in the ballroom followed Alexander and Clare as they approached the podium. The host welcomed them warmly before stepping aside. Alexander accepted the microphone with the ease of someone accustomed to public attention, yet there was nothing theatrical about him. He did not appear interested in impressing anyone. He simply stood there with quiet confidence while the room gradually settled into silence. "Thank you for being here tonight," he said. His voice was calm and measured. "The work we celebrate this evening is never accomplished by one person. Success is always built through partnerships, trust, and people who believe in something larger than themselves." Ryan listened carefully. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Around the room, guests nodded in agreement. Alexander spoke briefly about leadership, community projects, and future initiatives. Then he paused. His gaze moved across the audience before settling on Clare. A warm smile appeared on his face. The kind that could not be rehearsed. The kind that revealed genuine admiration. There is one person, he continued, who deserves far more credit than she will ever ask for. Clare immediately lowered her eyes, almost embarrassed by the attention. Soft laughter spread through the audience. Clearly many people understood exactly who he meant. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. Several years ago, Alexander said, "I met someone who taught me that resilience is not loud. It does not demand recognition. It quietly shows up every day and keeps moving forward." The ballroom remained completely silent. "She taught me that character matters more than status. That integrity matters more than appearances. And that true success means helping other people rise with you." Clare looked genuinely uncomfortable receiving praise, which somehow made the moment even more authentic. Then Alexander extended his hand toward her. "Clare, thank you for being that person." Applause filled the room again. Louder than before. Ryan stared in disbelief as dozens of guests rose to their feet. Some smiled directly at Clare. Others applauded with unmistakable affection. This was not the reaction people gave to a casual acquaintance. These people respected her. Admired her. Many of them clearly knew her story. Madison slowly turned toward Ryan. "How does everyone know her?" she asked quietly. Ryan had no answer. None at all. The woman standing on that stage seemed completely different from the person he thought he remembered. Yet the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Perhaps she had not changed as much as he assumed. Perhaps he had simply never taken the time to see her clearly. Alexander waited for the applause to fade before continuing. "Some of the most important achievements connected to our foundation happened because of Clare's leadership and vision." More applause followed. Ryan felt another wave of surprise. Leadership. Vision. The words echoed in his mind. Years ago, he had overlooked those qualities entirely. Now an entire room full of influential people seemed eager to celebrate them. As Clare finally accepted the microphone, she thanked everyone with characteristic humility. She spoke briefly, giving credit to teams, volunteers, and community partners rather than herself. The audience listened with genuine respect. No one appeared impatient. No one seemed distracted. When she finished, the room erupted once more. Ryan stood frozen. For years, he had assumed he knew how Clare's story ended. Standing there beneath the glow of the chandeliers, he was beginning to realize that her real story had only started after he walked away. And deep inside, he sensed that the biggest revelation of the night had not arrived yet. The applause gradually faded, but the energy inside the ballroom remained electric. Guests continued exchanging impressed looks while Clare handed the microphone back to Alexander. The glow from the chandeliers reflected across the stage, casting warm light over both of them as they stood side by side. Ryan could not stop watching. Neither could Madison. Every assumption they had carried into the evening seemed to be unraveling piece by piece. Alexander thanked the audience once more before turning toward Clare. There was something remarkably natural about the way they moved around each other. No effort. No performance. Just a quiet understanding built over time. The host stepped forward again with a smile. "There is one more thing I would like to acknowledge before we continue with tonight's program." The room settled once more. The host looked toward Clare and Alexander. Many people know about the incredible impact of the Kingsley Foundation. What fewer people know is that some of its most successful initiatives were developed under the leadership of Clare Bennett. More applause followed. Clare smiled politely, though she seemed uncomfortable being the center of attention. The host laughed softly. She never enjoys hearing this part. The audience laughed with him. Clearly, many people were familiar with her humility. Ryan stared in disbelief. Not only did these people know Clare. They seemed genuinely fond of her. The host continued. "In fact, several years ago, when our foundation faced some of its biggest challenges, it was Clare's vision that helped guide us forward. Madison slowly folded her arms. "How have we never heard any of this?" she whispered. Ryan did not answer. He could not. The truth was becoming increasingly obvious. While he had spent years assuming Clare's life remained ordinary, she had been building something extraordinary. Then the host smiled and glanced toward Alexander. "Of course, there is another reason Clare Bennett is very important to our organization." The audience immediately reacted with knowing smiles. Several guests laughed softly. Alexander shook his head as though he already knew where this was going. Clare looked down, smiling in embarrassment. Ryan felt a strange tension settle across his shoulders. The host continued. "Ladies and gentlemen, leadership partnerships are valuable. Business partnerships are valuable. But some partnerships are even more meaningful than that." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Then the host delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Please join me in recognizing Alexander Kingsley and his wife, Clare Kingsley." For one brief second, Ryan thought he had misheard. The words echoed through the ballroom. His wife. Clare Kingsley. The audience erupted into applause. Several guests rose to their feet once again. Alexander smiled and gently placed his hand over Clare's. The gesture was simple. Respectful. Entirely natural. Yet it confirmed everything. Madison's eyes widened. "His wife," she whispered. Ryan felt completely frozen. The room around him seemed distant. His thoughts struggled to catch up with reality. Clare had not simply met Alexander Kingsley. She had not merely worked alongside him. She was married to him. The realization hit harder than anything else that evening. Suddenly every unanswered question found its answer. The familiarity. The trust. The admiration. The quiet confidence she carried. She had built a life far beyond anything Ryan had imagined. Not because she chased attention. Not because she tried to prove anyone wrong. She had simply continued moving forward while everyone else underestimated her. On stage, Alexander looked at Clare with unmistakable pride. Clare returned the look with a warm smile. There was no need for grand declarations. Their connection spoke for itself. Around the ballroom, guests celebrated the couple as though this revelation surprised no one except Ryan. And standing beneath the golden lights, surrounded by applause, Ryan finally understood the truth. The woman he once believed he had outgrown had become someone far beyond anything he had ever taken the time to see. The applause lingered long after the announcement, filling the ballroom with a warmth that seemed impossible to ignore. Yet for Ryan, everything felt strangely quiet. He stood among hundreds of people, but the only thing he could hear clearly was the realization settling inside him. Clare had never come here to prove anything. She had not arrived with a dramatic speech. She had not sought revenge. She had not even mentioned the past. She had simply walked into the room as the person she had become. On stage, the program continued. Awards were presented. Guests laughed and celebrated. Conversations gradually returned to normal. But Ryan noticed something he had overlooked all evening. Every time someone approached Clare, they treated her with genuine respect. Not because of Alexander's success. Not because of her title. Because of who she was. The admiration in their voices had nothing to do with wealth. It came from years of trust, leadership, and kindness. Madison eventually excused herself to speak with another group of guests, leaving Ryan standing alone near the edge of the ballroom. For the first time that night, he understood how Clare must have felt years ago when people quietly moved on without looking back. Across the room, Clare and Alexander were speaking with a group of foundation directors. Alexander listened attentively while Clare shared an idea about an upcoming project. Several people took notes. Others nodded thoughtfully. Ryan watched the interaction and felt something unexpected. Not jealousy. Regret. Regret for all the moments he dismissed her opinions. Regret for the conversations he rushed through. Regret for believing that potential only existed when it arrived wrapped in status and recognition. Time passed. Guests slowly began moving toward the exits. The city lights beyond the windows shimmered against the night sky. Eventually, Ryan saw Claire step away from a conversation and head toward the hallway leading to the ballroom entrance. Before he could talk himself out of it, he followed. He found her standing near a quiet corner overlooking the lobby below. For a brief moment, it felt strangely similar to years ago. Just the two of them. No audience. No applause. No distractions. Claire turned and noticed him approaching. Her expression remained calm. "Ryan," she said softly. "Congratulations," he replied after a long pause. "I mean that." Claire smiled. "Thank you." Another silence followed. Ryan searched for the perfect words but discovered there were none. Finally, he spoke honestly. "I did not realize how much you had accomplished." Claire looked toward the city lights beyond the glass before answering. Most of it happened one day at a time. There was no arrogance in her voice. No satisfaction at his surprise. Just simple truth. Ryan nodded slowly. "You seem happy." Claire's smile deepened slightly. "I am." The answer carried a peace that could not be faked. A peace built through years of growth, setbacks, resilience, and purpose. In that moment, Ryan understood something important. Claire's victory had never been about marrying a billionaire. It had never been about proving him wrong. The real transformation happened long before Alexander entered her life. It happened when she stopped measuring her worth through someone else's opinion. Footsteps approached from behind. Alexander arrived and offered Claire his coat as the evening air drifted through the nearby entrance doors. She accepted it with a grateful smile. Ryan extended his hand. Alexander shook it warmly. No tension. No competition. Just quiet confidence. Moments later, Alexander and Claire walked toward the exit together. Their silhouettes moved beneath the golden lights before disappearing into the night beyond the glass doors. Ryan remained where he was, watching until they were gone. For years, he believed success meant being admired by others. Claire had discovered something greater. She did not win him back. She won herself.